There's no one right way to take a portrait, but one thing you can do to get different results with your photos is to try different focal lengths. It's easy to think that longer lenses are mostly just for zooming in, but that's not entirely true. And even when you're keeping the subject at exactly the same size in your frame, the results can be very different. So today I'll show you some examples of my photos that were taken at 35mm and 50mm and 85mm and explain to you what the differences were and the different results that you can get with them. So last weekend I went down to LA Arts District to meet up with my model Jerry to shoot some fashion portraits, which I don't do very often because, you know, fashion, as you can see, not exactly my strength. But it was a pretty simple shoot and it was a beautiful day, and we met up about an hour before the sunset, so we had to move pretty quickly. So we were literally just walking and shooting any spots we could find. So for the wide end, I brought my 16-35 and I also brought my 35 1.4. This is the Mark I version. And I also brought the 50mm 1.2, and I didn't think I would need it, but just in case, I also brought my 85 1.2 as well. So I started taking some wide angle shots with my 16-35 just to get a little more backgrounds into the shots. Normally with fashion portraits, you obviously want your model and your clothes to stand out more, and you don't want your background to be too busy. But him wearing bright orange made my job a lot easier, and it complemented the backgrounds really well. And you know, just because it shouldn't be busy, it doesn't mean your background should be boring. You still want an interesting composition, and even if you replaced your model with a much more average looking person with more average looking clothes, you still want it to be a good photo. And also, since this is a fashion shoot, you obviously want the whole body in the frame. So shooting at wider angle can be very convenient, especially on narrower streets where you can't get too far away from the subject. But I wouldn't call this the most flattering range for portraits. At 35 and below, this will give you the most distortion. As you can see on these photos, his lower body and his feet are appearing much larger and longer than they really are compared to his upper body, because wide angle lenses make the objects that are closer to the lens appear bigger. I mean, imagine that was your face, and that's why people take selfies like this at an upper angle, as far away from the face as possible, instead of like down here, so your face doesn't look like Jabba the Hutt. But you can also use that distortion as your advantage. At this focal length, to get the whole body in the frame, you will be much closer to the subject, and also very often you'll be shooting from below eye level, which can make the subject look more charismatic and heroic. But if you want more realistic proportion, you have to go a little longer than that. And next, we're going to take a look at some examples taken with my 50mm 1.2. And this is such a great all-around general purpose portrait lens, and it's not too long, it's not too narrow. Things just look right. And normally I wouldn't be carrying around 35 and 50 and 85 in the same bag, but if I could only use one out of the three, I'll probably use the 50mm. And if you're a beginner, a 50mm is probably the first prime that you should buy because it's the most affordable. I mean, obviously not the 1.2. This is not a great example of affordable, but this is such a versatile lens, and you get the reasonable amount of background separation, and you don't have to be too close or too far away from the subject. If you're shooting fashion, this lens is a must-have. And now let's move on to the 85. I wasn't expecting to use this a lot, but we found some quieter streets where we could just shoot right in the middle of the road. And with this lens, when you can get the subject in the frame, the results can be phenomenal. This will give you the most pop out of the three and the most background blur. I mean, this is almost like so good, it almost looks fake. If you just crop this photo in the middle, it almost looks like iPhone portrait mode. But we got some really amazing shots with this lens. But as I mentioned, this will give you the least amount of distortion, and you can already tell just by looking at the photos that I'm standing a lot farther away from the subject compared to I did with my 35mm lens. This gives you an effect that it makes the subject look more important, and it makes the viewers think that we should pay attention to this person, we should pay attention to whatever we're looking at, compared to this photo, which is more about where he is. This is more about who he is and what he's doing. If you're just taking a headshot or an upper torso shot, I usually like to use either 135 or 70-200 better. But to get the whole body in the shot, the 85 is probably much more versatile. So those were the different portrait focal lengths explained. I hope this is helpful, and go out and experiment with your lenses. And don't get discouraged by the fact that these are really expensive lenses. There are much more affordable versions of these lenses available. And in most cases, those lenses will actually perform better for beginners. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.